Hey guys, JDR Exospace here. So I have read some of the UAP disclosure legislation that's been proposed, and it is crazier than you think. It may be about as close of an admission that we are not alone in the universe as we're going to get until we actually see the bodies. So this is the UAP amendment that's been proposed by Senators Schumer, Rounds, Rubio, and Gillibrand. So this is a bipartisan measure. And just some of the terms and admissions that are included in this document are a pretty compelling admission that they have seen some things behind closed doors that they can't explain. Congress finds and declares the following: all federal government records related to unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAP, should be preserved and centralized for historical and federal government purposes. All federal government records concerning UAP should carry a presumption of immediate disclosure, and all records should be eventually disclosed to enable the public to become fully informed about the history of the federal government's knowledge and involvement surrounding UAP. Legislation is necessary to create an enforceable, independent, and accountable process for the public disclosure of such records. Legislation is necessary because credible evidence and testimony indicates that federal government UAP records exist that have not been declassified or subject to mandatory declassification review as set forth in Executive Order 13526. Okay, now there are two major revelations just in that introduction, and we are just scratching the surface of this bill because there's some wild stuff in here. So the first revelation is just a blatant admission that they have seen enough closed-door whistleblower testimony from all of these whistleblowers in Congress so far that they believe that all of these records exist that have not been declassified, and they want to get to the bottom of it. And the second revelation here is the admission about the reason that it hasn't been declassified, which is an overbroad interpretation of some of these national security rules that exempt them from declassifying these records. Legislation is necessary because Section 552 of Title V U.S. Code, as implemented by the executive branch, has proven inadequate in achieving the timely public disclosure of government UAP records that are subject to mandatory declassification review. Legislation is necessary to restore proper oversight over UAP records by elected officials in both the executive and legislative branches of the federal government that has otherwise been lacking as of the enactment of this act. So this legislation is essentially an admission that the highest levels of Congress and executive branches are not being read into these programs, and the only reason they know about them are these closed-door whistleblower complaints. Legislation is necessary to afford complete and timely access to all knowledge gained by the federal government concerning UAP in furtherance of comprehensive, open, scientific and technological research and development, essential to avoiding or mitigating potential technological surprise, in furtherance of urgent national security concerns and the public interest. The purposes of this title are: 1, to provide for the creation of the UAP records collection at the National Archives, and 2, to require the expeditious public transmission to the archivist and public disclosure of such records. Now, I think the craziest revelations are actually in the definition section of this amendment, which, as someone who's read a lot of government regulations, it's not normally very exciting stuff. Close observer. The term close observer means anyone who has come into close proximity to UAP or non-human intelligence. Legacy program. The term legacy program means all federal, state, and local government, and here's the important part, commercial industry, academic, and private sector endeavors to collect, exploit, or reverse engineer technologies of unknown origin or examine biological evidence of living or deceased non-human intelligence that predates the date of the enactment of this act. They go so far as to define non-human intelligence. The term non-human intelligence means any sentient, intelligent, non-human life form, regardless of nature or ultimate origin, that may be presumed responsible for UAP or of which the federal government has become aware. The importance of this document, whether or not this even gets passed into law and signed by the president, cannot be understated. This is an admission from the highest levels of our elected government that they have seen enough evidence and whistleblower testimony behind closed doors that they are defining non-human intelligence. They've seen enough of these videos and enough testimony from firsthand accounts to think that we have recovered alien technology, alien bodies, and they have to go so far as to define it in this legislation. That is wild. Technologies of unknown origin. The term technologies of unknown origin means any materials or metamaterials, ejecta, crash debris, mechanisms, machinery, equipment, assemblies or subassemblies, engineering models or processes, damaged or intact aerospace vehicles, and damaged or intact ocean surface and undersea craft associated with UAP or incorporating science and technology that lacks prosaic attribution or known means of human manufacture. They are going so far here as to specify this is not just aircraft flying through the air. This is any evidence of craft that have the ability to travel under the ocean, between ocean and air. This is crazy stuff here, guys. And they define unidentified anomalous phenomena as such. The term unidentified anomalous phenomena means any object operating or judged capable of operating in outer space, the atmosphere, ocean surfaces, or undersea, lacking prosaic attribution due to performance characteristics and properties not previously known to be achievable based upon commonly accepted physical principles. Unidentified anomalous phenomena are differentiated from both attributed and temporarily non-attributed objects by one or more of the following observables. Now, before I read this section, as someone who's actually written some regulatory criteria for government, and just on the local level, I've never written anything, obviously, that's been passed by Congress, not to that extent. When you're trying to pass government regulation, you are trying to zero in on exactly what you're talking about so nobody can wiggle out of any loopholes, right? They are listing very specific things that they're talking about that falls under the definition of UAP and what UAP might be characterized by. Instantaneous acceleration absent apparent inertia. Hypersonic velocity absent a thermal signature and sonic shockwave. Transmedium, such as space to ground and air to undersea travel. Positive lift, contrary to known aerodynamic principles. Multispectral signature control. Physical or invasive, biological effects to close observers and the environment. The reason I think this is so crazy is I do believe that they have seen enough evidence of each one of those things in these closed door sessions that they thought it important enough to specifically define them as falling under the definition of UAP. I mean, obviously, we're sitting on the outside, we're just speculating about what's going on in these closed door sessions, but that seems to be a pretty crazy admission of what they've actually seen. And it even goes so far as to describe what a UAP record is. The term UAP record means a record that is related to UAP, technologies of unknown origin or non-human intelligence, that was created or made available for use by, obtained by, or otherwise came into the possession of. And they list all of the typical government agencies that you might expect to see here, but here's a really important part and why, if this passes the way that it's currently written, it has huge implications. Anybody that has a UAP record, including any independent office or agency, any other department, office, agency, committee, or commission of the federal government, any state or local government department, and any private sector person or entity formerly or currently under contract or some other agreement with the federal government. Now, if we're willing to believe even a fraction of the public whistleblower testimony that's come forward, it's primarily believed that a lot of these alien bodies and recovered technology are actually in the possession of the private sector that receive federal money but aren't exactly accountable the same way that government agencies are. So this is extremely important. And here's where we get into some really important details too, because they're actually specifying what is a crime, what is a violation of this law. No UAP record shall be destroyed, altered, or mutilated in any way. No UAP record made available or disclosed to the public prior to the date of the enactment of this act may be withheld, redacted, postponed for public disclosure, or reclassified. No UAP record created by a person or entity outside the federal government shall be withheld, redacted, postponed for public disclosure, or reclassified. Now, they seem to have thought of a lot of the normal loopholes that are used to get out of legislation like this. So here's where they talk about where they can't postpone records indefinitely. All postponed UAP records determined to require continued postponement shall require an unclassified written description of the reason for such continued postponement relevant to these specific records. Now, that seems actually to be a pretty easy one to wiggle out of, because they could literally just submit a record that's unclassified that says national security with everything else blacked out. And they seem to have been able to get away with that in the past, and they may use some kind of loopholes like that in the future, which calls into question the enforceability of some of this and what it's actually going to disclose. But let's continue. Each UAP record shall be publicly disclosed in full and available in the collection not later than the date that is 25 years after the date of the first creation of the record by the originating body, unless the president certifies that continued postponement is made necessary by an identifiable harm to the military, defense, intelligence operations, law enforcement, or conduct of foreign relations, and the identifiable harm is of such gravity that it outweighs the public interest in disclosure. So that essentially says that any document older than 25 years is supposed to be turned over no matter what, unless the president specifically says no and provides justification for why he's saying no. And they actually seem to also be making an attempt here to protect whistleblowers even beyond the Whistleblower Act that currently exists. They can postpone disclosure if the UAP record would reveal the name or identity of a living person who provided confidential information to the federal government and would pose a substantial risk of harm to that person. So here's where we get to the meat of how some of this stuff is actually going to be enforced. The president, by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall appoint without regard to political affiliation 9 citizens of the United States to serve as members of the review board to ensure and facilitate the review, transmission to the archivist, and public disclosure of government records relating to UAP. They shall be impartial citizens, none of whom shall have had any previous or current involvement with any legacy program or controlling authority relating to the collection, exploitation, or reverse engineering of technologies of unknown origin, or the examination of biological evidence of living or deceased non-human intelligence. So they're expressly prohibiting anybody that's had any contact with these secret programs to be involved in this review board. Very important. Shall be distinguished persons of high national professional reputation in their respective fields and who possess an appreciation of the value of such material, to the public, scholars, and government. This 9-member panel shall include at least 1 current or former national security official, 1 current or former foreign service official, 1 scientist or engineer, 1 economist, 1 professional historian, and 1 sociologist. Now, I don't know why those last 3 are on there, specifically the economist, professional historian, and sociologist, other than to try and weigh the impact of these disclosures on the public and how it's going to affect financial markets and just people's general behavior. But it makes up 30% of the board. I don't know if that's maybe too much. I'm not sure. And here's a really important part when it comes to enforceability. They have subpoena power. Request the Attorney General to subpoena private persons to compel testimony, records, and other information relevant to its responsibilities under this title. Hold hearings, administer oaths, and subpoena witnesses and documents. And again, some more whistleblower protections. Witness immunity. The review board shall be considered to be an agency of the United States. Witnesses, close observers, and whistleblowers providing information directly to the review board shall also be afforded the protections provided to such persons. This amendment by itself, whether it passes or not, is a giant revelation about what Congress knows and what they don't know. And more importantly, what they're trying to get to the bottom of what they don't know. They've already seen so much behind closed doors that everybody involved in these sessions is coming out publicly now and saying, there's something here, there's UAP, it might be aliens, it might not be, but it's not human, and we need to get to the bottom of what it is. Now, I have to include one final caveat here. If any of these whistleblowers' testimony is true, many of these are private sector, private company, black ops, probably illegal operations. Just because a new law gets passed, it doesn't mean all of a sudden these people are going to come out of the woodwork and go, yep, I committed crimes, this is an illegal program. I don't think those people are going to be coming forward, even with this new legislation. However, again, like I always say, we are dependent upon brave individuals, whistleblowers coming forward with what they know about these programs and saying it publicly. I mean, it's one thing to say it behind closed doors, and I'm glad Congress is finally taking steps to get to the bottom of this. But I really think we need firsthand testimony and people who have firsthand knowledge of this coming with receipts and telling everybody, telling the public what they know and taking advantage of these new whistleblower protections. I think that's the best chance we have of ever getting to the bottom of what's going on, whether or not it's just some technology that a really smart engineer or scientist came up with at one of these private companies and they've taken advantage of it, or if we really do have recovered alien bodies and technology and all this stuff's been reverse engineered. I fundamentally believe we are never going to know without more whistleblower testimony, bringing forward receipts and talking to the public. And I'm hoping that this legislation is just one more step to getting us to that full disclosure. But anyway, that's all I have for you guys on this video. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so, and I will catch you guys on the next one.